So, a while back, a long while back at this point, I asked what you guys wanted to see more of from me. RyleeBat commented that they'd like to see me talk more about Christianity after my comparison video of the Prince of Egypt versus Gods and Kings got taken down for copyright, and I was just too lazy to fight it at the time. But yeah, I'd love to talk about more Christian media. Let's see, I could start with a property I know really well, something I grew up with, something that has always meant a lot to me. Good Omens. I just watched the show last month, and I still haven't read the book. But hey, season 2 drops later this month, so what better time to get my thoughts out there? I am going to do my best to get this video up before the end of the month because I wanted to get out my thoughts on the series as it is so far. Because I am, after all, an annoying purist who thinks great media is better left alone before you have the chance to ruin it. And because this is a story that's worth talking about. Let's start with what is easily the best part of the series, Aziraphale and Crowley. More specifically, Michael Sheen and David Tennant as Aziraphale and Crowley. Talk about pitch-perfect casting. Sheen and Tennant are two of the greatest living actors. Each of them turns out an incredible performance, and together they have amazing chemistry. Great acting, like great animating, will take every opportunity to say something about the characters, and the way they walk, gesture, carry themselves. Just watching Crowley and Aziraphale walking together says so much about who they are. Even this little moment here, where they arrive at the old hospital, and Aziraphale takes the path, while Crowley just cuts across the grass. It's such a small thing, but moments like this help make the characters feel more realized. I could watch these two play these characters all day. Of course, one downside to this is some of the other characters are just less compelling by comparison. The Them, Anathema, and the Witchfinders are all interesting in their own right, but I did find my interest waning at times when they were the focus of any given scene. Call them victims of not being Blorbo enough, I guess. I really do like where Adam and Anathema's story arcs end. That's one of my favorite parts of the series, but we'll come back to that. I really enjoyed all the ways the show plays with gender expressions. Half the characters are supernatural beings for whom gender doesn't apply anyway. Casting women to play Michael and Beelzebub was a great choice. I like how pollution is played by a woman, but the mailman calls them Sir. And I especially love that various characters use all kinds of different pronouns for God. Aziraphale uses her, Crowley calls God they, Jesus' Father forgive them is unchanged. It's great! God is beyond human comprehension. It's nice to see that explicit acknowledgement in a piece of media, especially from creators who aren't Christian. Good Omens isn't perfect, there's plenty you can criticize about it, but some of the criticisms are just baffling to me. And I love that Gaiman has no patience for these takes in particular. Adam and Eve wouldn't have been white. Am I the only one who found Crowley's eyes hard to look at? Maybe it's the slit pupils or the particular shade of yellow they used, but I find myself going cross-eyed trying to look at him. It's much less disorienting when his eyes are just completely yellow. I get why it wouldn't be practical to do that in every one of Tennant's scenes, but it would have been nice to get a bit more of it here and there. I have mixed feelings about Satan's appearance in the finale. I love how God never shows up on screen, aside from some shots of hands that suggest God's actions more than being a literal portrayal of God's actual hands. I almost think Satan would have been a more effective antagonist if he'd been left entirely off screen. Nothing is scarier, after all. Our imaginations do the heavy lifting for us, filling in the blanks with whatever frightens us the most. Having Satan burst out of the ground feels a little cheesy. Just a little bit. At the same time, it does feel necessary for the moment, which is admittedly a strong one. Adam directly standing up to Satan, calling him a bad father, feels all the more significant that he's doing it right to his face. And having Adam denounce the devil, seeing him being replaced with Mr. Young, it's a great visual. I don't think it would have worked as well without that visual element. And it's not a bad effect, the CG is very good. And I like that they didn't go with a cartoonishly evil voice for the character, that does help a lot. I do also have mixed feelings about the way the Four Horsemen are defeated. It seemed a little anticlimactic after all that build-up. But that does also feel kind of like the point, that the heroes of the story win the day not by fighting, but by being true to themselves. Everyone involved is trying to prevent a war, after all. A big fight scene wouldn't have felt right thematically. Newt saving the day by being bad at his job, I love that moment. And nobody is insignificant. Everyone can make a difference in their own way. And I do really like the visual of children standing up to the Four Horsemen. children being a narrative representation of the future, the next generation, and saying, no, we believe in a better future, and we are going to make a better future. This line in particular hit me pretty hard. I couldn't find a clip on YouTube, but it's the scene where Adam says that everything is messed up, and Brian says, well, that's a reason to fix everything, not destroy it. The feeling that everything is fucked beyond repair is one that's only grown stronger in the 3 decades since Good Omens was first published. But Adam's initial idea to just wipe out humanity and start over, that's the easy way out. Yes, it'll be harder to fix the world's problems through actions and words and gradual change, much, much harder, but it is ultimately the more worthwhile option, and the only option available to those of us living in the real world. In light of all the terrible things going on around the world, it can be tempting to just give up sometimes. And it's nice to be reminded that that's not the answer. Admittedly, I was a little hesitant about Good Omens. My own relationship with religion and my OCD can make it difficult for me to approach stories that are so transgressive. But I don't think Christianity should be off limits for non-Christian creators. As with anything, as long as it's done respectfully, I think it's perfectly fine to find inspiration from and use Christian imagery. What bothers me is media that approaches religion with a smug superiority. Stories about how religion is stupid and anyone who believes in God is a blind idiot, where the heroes congratulate themselves for cracking the code. And I have to imagine stories like that are insufferable to anyone. Good Omens isn't that. It isn't a condemnation or even a mockery of Christianity. It's subversive, but I don't think it can be accused of being disrespectful. It asks questions, but asking questions isn't bad. For me personally, the hardest scene to watch was the Ark scene. It's very representative of stories in the Bible that are difficult to come to terms with. It's hard to read the story of Noah and not seeing it as condoning violence as a solution. And I can't pretend that I have all the answers. Maybe it feels like a cop-out, but Aziraphale is right. God's plan can never be fully understood. That's the point. Anyone who says they do is fooling themselves. I am kind of surprised they went with actually having the crucifixion in the show. We don't see the Ark during the flood. We see the nails being driven in. It is hard to watch because it's such a violent moment, but it doesn't feel disrespectful. It's appropriately solemn. I think the hardest part of it for me was the suggestion in the dialogue that Jesus' death was all for nothing. It'd be one thing if Aziraphale approached Crowley with the attitude that, like, oh, hey, this too has a purpose, and he'd see it in 3 days' time. But then again, I'm not sure I'd want Aziraphale to be confident in this moment, because not seeing the bigger picture and having faith anyway is the whole point. It's what makes the final conclusion Aziraphale comes to so poignant. Regardless of what does or doesn't work in that moment, I do love this exchange.
What was it he said that got everyone so upset? Be kind to each other. Oh yeah, that'll do it.
Good Omens does touch on a personal hang-up of mine. I have a hard time with demon characters being portrayed as good or sympathetic. And I'm sure I'll always have that hang-up. That said, I do really love Crowley. I have a soft spot for the gruff character with a heart of gold, the hard-ass who lives in deep denial of their own goodness, and that's Crowley to a T. Both of the leads actually check off a lot of my favorite tropes. Aziraphale being a great example of good is not soft, and screw the rules, I'm doing what's right. I love characters who are absolute cinnamon rolls, but also complete and total little shits. I actually had a harder time with the way the angels were portrayed. Crowley is a demon who doesn't want to be a demon. He doesn't revel in doing evil, he doesn't like hurting people, unlike the other demons who don't care who they hurt or what they destroy. And we're not meant to sympathize with the other demons, they are the bad guys. But the angels are just assholes. It would have been one thing if the angels saw Armageddon as an unfortunate necessity. If Gabriel and the others had had a bit more sympathy for humanity as a creation of God, that Armageddon would be difficult and painful, but that the just would have their reward when it was over.
There needn't be a war. We can save everyone.
In a universe where heaven exists, then dying would only be a terrible fate if heaven was terrible. In the series, heaven is portrayed as very cold and sterile. I almost think the angels would have worked better if they were just as unfeeling to match. if they were stoic and robotic, automatic and unthinking in following their orders. But this is an easy trap of criticism to get into, and I don't want to get caught in it. I can say how I would have done it, but it's not my story. And hey, if the angels had been written that way, we wouldn't have gotten John Hamm's amazing performance. They may not be robotic about it, but the angels' whole deal is that they won't question their orders. They won't think freely or exercise free will. They want the war not because it will finally rid the world of evil, but to settle things with the enemy. They don't want to make the world a better place, the world is just a casualty. They want a war because they're told they should want a war. And yes, from a human standpoint, war is, objectively, bad. But there are things worth fighting. Injustice, oppression, corruption. It's the difference between anger and righteous anger. Anger is a human emotion, and it's natural and healthy to feel it, but it can be used to hurt others if left unchecked. But righteous anger is a good thing. Righteous anger looks at the wrongs of the world, at the ways people are being mistreated and exploited, and says, no.
Silence! Justice!
I always chafe against depictions of Christianity as lame, and Crowley mocking heaven for not having any decent music, that does count. To be fair, a lot of Christian media invites this opinion on itself. There are so many examples of Christian media trying too hard to be hip instead of authentic, and just being so cringe as a result. But God is lame because her favorite musical is The Sound of Music? First of all, The Sound of Music is awesome. Second, The Sound of Music is entirely thematically appropriate. It's the story of a woman who aspires to be a nun, but isn't very good at it, who's mocked by the other nuns for being odd, but who is ultimately vindicated by the Mother Superior, who tells her that loving a man does not mean she loves God any less. It's a story where in the climax, two of the nuns save the day by committing a sin to save the protagonist, by doing what is right instead of following the rules. I didn't even think about this until I was looking through TV tropes, but it fits so well I have to believe the use of The Sound of Music specifically was very intentional. Having the angels drop a few lines here and there helps drive home the fact that they are missing the ultimate point. Their understanding of God is a very surface-level understanding. And that's a very important aspect of their portrayal, the fact that they're more concerned about following orders than doing what is right. There is a smugness about them, a self-righteousness, that unfortunately fits perfectly in line with the most toxic Christian communities we have today. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a very healthy church, where asking questions was not only allowed, but encouraged. But I have had experience with an incredibly toxic religious environment. And yeah, it felt exactly like how heaven and the angels are portrayed here. Don't ask questions, stay in line, do what you're told. Don't deviate from the rulebook, but don't question us when we break the rules because it's okay when we do it. To that end, having the angels be more robotic or even more reasonable wouldn't have worked for this story. I do like the corporate aesthetic that surrounds heaven in that respect. It's massive and pristine, but it's also empty. One thing I found awkward about the writing is there are times where it seems to posit that good and evil are equal and opposite forces that ultimately cancel each other out. Heaven and hell are both headquartered in the same building, and the show does use corporate imagery to portray both sides, though in very different ways. Hell is this cramped, dank, dimly lit, filthy backroom, while heaven is a super corporation, a megachurch, clean and sterile and entirely indifferent. There is a moment in the climax where Aziraphale calls Adam human incarnate. I like that a lot. I just wish it hadn't been preceded by the implication that being human is better than being divine, that humanity is better than heaven. That feels a lot like hubris. And then Aziraphale says that he and Crowley will stand beside Adam for good or for evil, and it's just kind of awkward. I appreciate the sentiment that Aziraphale and Crowley are going to stand by Adam no matter what happens. I just feel like the wording could have been better. And I do like this moment a lot. Visually, it's a great scene with Aziraphale and Crowley on either side of Adam, taking his hands and promising to stand beside him. It's just that the writing is a bit clumsy. It'd be one thing if the opposing forces were order and chaos, or truth and ideals, or hope and despair, but good and evil? Crowley predicts that the actual apocalypse will be between heaven and hell together against humanity, and I just don't see how that would resolve. Putting aside the morality of implying humanity is greater than heaven, these are humans. Squishy, mortal humans versus actual supernatural immortal beings. Just in the logic of the story, they wouldn't win a literal war. But that's getting way ahead of myself. I can't judge it until I've seen it, if it ever comes to be, which, honestly, I hope it does. I'm really excited to see Season 2. I'd love for Gaiman to be able to get the conclusion that he's building up to. And hey, the final confrontation of the first story may have felt a bit anticlimactic, but it wasn't a cop-out. It felt right for the story being told. And that's all I can really ask for. A story that feels right, an ending that feels earned. In the same vein, Crowley and Aziraphale's relationship feels strange. It seems to say that Aziraphale's blessings and Crowley's temptations cancel each other out. They agree to take on each other's assignments to lighten each other's workload, but why would an angelic being ever agree to do things that would hurt people? Because over the years the Christian church as an institution has declared so many things to be bad or sinful that are actually harmless or good, there is a lot of desire to push back against that kind of thinking. There are so many good things in this world that God put here for us to enjoy. Indulging in them is not a sin. Loving someone is not a sin. And I think it's important then to remember what sin really is. Sin is at its core hurting other people. Gluttony isn't enjoying food, it's eating more than you need to. Lust isn't having or enjoying sex, it's using sex to manipulate or control someone else. No one is gonna argue that murder is okay. Even the fact that the angels and the demons have the same powers was kind of confusing. To me, it would have made more sense that angels could only do good things and demons could only do bad things. But again, that's bringing my biases to the table. Crowley and Aziraphale are both more representative of humanity, and humans are neither completely good or completely evil. We all have the capacity for both, and the ability to choose. And in fact, the ability to choose is the whole point. So, no, good and evil are not two sides of the same coin.
Good is better. That's why they call it good.
And I don't think that's really the point Good Omens is trying to make. For all of Crowley's dialogue about canceling each other out, it does not feel like the story is trying to take a completely morally neutral stance. If good and evil really were meant to be seen as equal and opposite and necessary forces, then Aziraphale and Crowley should be punished by the narrative by either being too much like how they should be or too much like how they shouldn't be. But neither of them is ever punished by the narrative for doing good. Aziraphale's greatest strength is his kindness. But he's also never punished by the narrative for breaking rules. All of his rule breaking, or at least the majority of it, is done in the service of helping others. Meanwhile, Crowley is also never punished by the narrative for doing good, while all of his worst actions come back to bite him in the ass.
Crowley had made it. Now Crowley was trapped inside it.
And even in the finale, that moment where Aziraphale and Crowley take their stand with Adam, Aziraphale once more wields his flaming sword, a gift from God and symbol of his angelic nature, while Crowley wields his destroyed Bentley's tire iron, which is equally hilarious and heartwarming. So, no, I don't think Good Omens is trying to say that good and evil are of equal value, that evil is a welcome force in the world. In the end, Satan is very clearly the antagonist. The other demons besides Crowley are openly cruel and malicious. The Antichrist is a hero specifically because he rejects being the Antichrist. And this is the thread that ties the entire story together. This is the heart of Good Omens. The ability to think for yourself, the power to make choices, the divine gift of free will.
And you can't mess with free will.
Can I ask why?
Yes, you can. That's the beauty of it.
In the end, it is the hero's ability to make choices that saves the day. Aziraphale and Crowley choose to save the world rather than follow their orders. Anathema chooses to live the life she wants to live rather than the life she's been told to live. Adam chooses his own destiny. And all of these choices have a great undercurrent of love. Aziraphale and Crowley choose their love of humanity and each other over their respective sides. Adam chooses his love of his friends over the apocalypse. Anathema chooses Newt, I guess? Like, they're cute, don't get me wrong, they're so cute, but their romance does feel pretty rushed. Although, honestly, it feels more like Anathema chooses herself in the end. It's telling that Aziraphale ultimately loses his faith in heaven, but not in God. From the beginning, Aziraphale insists that God's plan is ineffable, that it's beyond understanding. And in the end, it's this very belief that allows him to stand by what he believes is right. I also like that Crowley and Aziraphale think they're subverting the great plan, while their plan is actually really close to what God's plan was all along. Raise the Antichrist to not want to be the Antichrist. And it works with the show's overall themes. It's just that instead of being hammered by opposing messages from Aziraphale and Crowley, in the hopes they would cancel each other out, Adam is sent to live a happy, simple childhood in a small town with friends and family who love him. He gets to grow up as a normal kid. This exchange in particular, I absolutely love.
What if the Almighty planned it like this all along? I wouldn't put it past her.
In the end, the protagonists are still unabashedly themselves. Crowley is still asking questions. Aziraphale is as faithful as he ever was. There's something really beautiful about the way Aziraphale and Crowley are able to save the world by being true to themselves. That humanity was trusted to a demon more concerned with understanding the world around him than causing harm, and an angel who prioritized kindness over following orders. Good Omens isn't perfect, of course it isn't, but it feels all the more special for its flaws. It embraces nuance and ambiguity in a way most official Christian media wouldn't dare to do, and for that alone, it's worth checking out. After all, anything that makes you use your God-given ability to think for yourself is worthwhile. Let me know what you think of Good Omens and what you're hoping to see in Season 2. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'm eternally optimistic, and I'll catch you guys next time. Feels right that... Hey, buddy. I do also have mixed feelings about the way the whole... Ugh. It's subversive, but I don't think it can be excuse. Our imaginations do the I can make words. Everyone involved is trying to prevent... Wow, I can talk.